Good evening, and welcome to another episode of the Perceptive podcast here on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. I am Josh Bycer, and we have another great cast lined up tonight. We're going to be discussing the game Evertried. This is kind of like a isometric, like turn-based roguelite. That for those of you watching this or listening to it recorded, we play this for one of our indies spotlight streams, and it's a game I'm looking forward to checking out in full when it's released. Joining me to discuss it is from Lunic Games. Please welcome to the cast this week, Pedro. How are you doing?
Hey Josh, thanks for having me. Doing good.
Yep, it is a pleasure to have you on. Like I said, we did check out the game, and you even caught our live stream when we reviewed the store page as well. So it's always
That's
great
right.
to have that on.
No, that's right. And I really appreciate all the work that you guys have been doing, especially with the mindset of talking about marketing for indie titles, because it's such an important topic that not everybody is going to take the time to explain how crucial it is to make sure a game has enough spotlight like it deserves.
Yep, and it is a very tricky topic, I think, for a lot of developers, especially like first time developers who may be listening to us right now, in terms of getting all that to work. And we still have a lot to discuss for today, so let's get into it. For people listening to us right now, could you talk a little bit about what your background is and what is Evertried?
Sure. So my name is Pedro Comenero, like you introduced me. I'm the co-founder of Lunic Games. And before working in Lunic Games, before founding Lunic Games with my business partner, Eduardo, I actually worked in a video game publisher in Latin America called Level Up Games. And they specialized in online gaming like FPSs and MMORPGs. And my work there was basically, it's almost like a tester kind of role, but more with a marketing sense of the testing. So instead of looking at the game as a product or how fun it is about the mechanics, I had to analyze the game and figure out if it's a good fit for the Latin America market, especially because of the culture. So, for instance, it we have here a market that has a purchasing power that's lower than the American crowd, but we also have culturally they like Asian style games, like anime kind of games. So it's a very unique market, and was a great experience to work as a content analyst there. And after working as basically a tester at Level Up, I started working as a business development analyst, which gave me the opportunity to go to GDC, Gamescom, and other conferences around the world to really understand how big the market is in terms of how serious it is, how business focused it is, and try to gain more maturity and business focus mindset to work with games. And after working at Level Up for about 5 years, I decided to open our development studio because although I really love to work at Level Up, my heart was in development, and to sell a game is very different than to do a game on your own, right? And in 2019, we decided to found Lunic Games, and our first title was a mobile game called Tower Smash, which was a free-to-play arcade game that we like to say it's like playing Guitar Hero with only two buttons. So there was like a pile of rocks, and you have to choose between the A attack and the B attack to keep breaking the rocks. And it was a great experience to learn about ourselves and really understand what kind of games we like to do, what kind of methodology we like to use in our work. But after that, we understood that we should have a focus on the PC and console markets, especially considering we don't have like such a big team. We have 4 people working at the League Games right now, and it can be really taxing to keep giving support for online games and mobile games. So it felt like a better strategy for us to work on polishing something that we can release, we can give the proper amount of support, and move along and do the next thing and the next thing and try to build a portfolio of games, right? And we during one of the an indie conference here in Brazil called Big Festival, we met in 2019 a programmer called Danilo Domingues, which had a prototype of a game where a cowboy moved along a board, tried to kill slimes to move to the next floor. And he was looking for a creative team that could help with game design, art, and the other parts of making a game real, right? And at the time, as soon as he showed us the prototype, our eyes started sparkling, and we knew it was something really special that we could turn into a very interesting game. At least we hoped at the time. And we decided to work with Danilo in a co-development style of development. And we started working on Evertried since August of 2019. And after that, we had a Kickstarter in 2020 to help us bring Evertride to the amount of content that we really want to. And right now we have a demo available on Steam, looking to launch the game by the end of this year. So everything seems like it's going well and coming together as we move into this journey of development.
Definitely fascinating. You gave me like a whole lot of things I can like jump onto like as follow questions, Pedro. Um, I guess like the first one that I want to touch on, because I think it's something that a lot of indie developers tend to struggle with. As we said like a few minutes ago, when it comes to marketing, like you said, like your first job, like your first formal like game dev job was doing content analysis when it came to like mobile games. You know what we consider good or bad for like that kind of market. I
Mm-hmm.
guess how how has that kind of like influenced your own design decisions or even your company decisions at Lunic?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in the marketing sense, I feel like it opened my eyes of the importance of planning your game ahead in terms of how do you plan to crack in the market, what kind of genre you're looking for, what kind of target audience you're looking for. So it just made me realize how little I still know about really doing proper marketing, how it's important for you to to pay enough attention to having a strong plan. So what it turned out in terms of strategy for Lunic Games is that before we do any kind of title, we do a lot of marketing research. We do a lot of research about target audience, what kind of experience we should aim for, what the market is already making available for players, that we should try to identify a niche or something that other games are not doing so. Because, especially in Brazil, because we don't have as many studios that have like 20 years of development and history, and is a more like a growing market, we have to
Mhm.
be really mindful of the choices that we make early in development. Because if we choose to make a game that we are passionate about, that we always want to make, and it doesn't have such a commercial um, a commercial reasoning behind of it, like a good plan to make it successful, we're just going to break our company, and everything's going to go downhill. So it makes us really try to be very mindful of the type of titles that we want to develop in terms of the commercial viability of the title before starting to work on it.
And as a quick apology, I said Lunic Games, it's Lunic. Sorry for messing up
Yeah,
the name of the studio.
no problem.
Yeah, and that is something that I hear from a lot of developers, and it's something a lot of studios I think struggle with. That idea of I want to make the game for me versus I want to make a game that can actually, bring income in for my company.
Right. No, it's a tough decision, especially when you're doing a game. You're doing game design for a game that you yourself you wouldn't play that kind of game like personally, but you have to make sure that game is fun for its right target audience. It's a tough decision to make, but in the end, the more the more mindful you are about the commercial viability of your game, the more likely it is that down the road you have enough income in your company, you have enough time and resources to make a game you're passionate about, that you can take the risk of it not performing well because you already did such a great job with previous titles.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, I really want to make a fighting game, which is not only a niche title, it doesn't generally sell too well, it's very competitive. You have to do a lot of support for tournaments, and we just cannot do this right now. We don't have the manpower, don't have the resources. It's too risky, so we shouldn't do this. But maybe down the road, if we have enough resources, then sure, if we are able to do that and it doesn't bring any kind of risk for the company. But if you want to work with games, you have to think of the commercial viability of things. But if you don't want to work with games, then of course let's develop games for hobbies. That's fine too. We just have to be really honest with the goals of what the work that we do.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it is a tough question for a lot of people to answer when they're trying to get started or even just trying to stay afloat in the game industry.
Right, right. Because some people really want to make games, and nothing should come in the way of you and making games if you really want to do that. But if you want to make money with games, then there's more homework to do before starting to develop a game or code a game. You have to know how to sell a game in the sense of target audience and game experience, before you start, because that can justify a lot of the design decisions. If you know you're going after a strategy player, someone that really enjoys like meaningful decisions and planning ahead, then you cannot have like too many random effects. You cannot make it too casual. You cannot make it too easy. There are some things that can dictate how you should develop your game itself. So knowing the market before developing is not an afterthought. Cannot be an afterthought like music cannot be an afterthought. Like art cannot be an afterthought. Everything has to be justified from the beginning.
Yep, definitely. Now, another question I wanted to ask you about kind of the Latin America game dev scene, because I've had a chance, like last year, I think I was introduced to the Brazil Games Festival, and I
Mhm.
had a chance to play games like Sky Paddle and a few other ones. And for like my audience, I think predominantly I have a lot of audience in like North America, the Canadian area, maybe some in Europe. But for people listening to us right now, like what has been kind of like the scene when it comes to game dev in Latin America, Brazil, and so on?
We have seen a very interesting pattern, because like 10 years ago there were maybe five or six big players in the market doing like, we know, Behold Studios and titles like Knights of Pen and Paper, Super Chroma Squad. We do have like titles that got international recognition, and but we saw a lot of smaller studios trying to do a game, maybe doing one game and then having to close studio, maybe doing two games and having to close studio, and a lot that had to resource to outsourcing to keep afloat. But now we see, at least in my opinion, a lot of more indie titles that have commercial viability, that games that have more clear way of marketing their games, a more clear market that they're going after, a more clear niche and genre they're looking after. So I see that the marketing, the market for the Brazilian development scene is as diverse as it was 10 years ago, but I see like the games are more competitive and they're trying to be more more able to fight in the international market, because there's like a saying that I really dislike in Brazil, in the Brazilian development scene, that is not as true right now as it was. But sometimes there was a game that was good and was made by Brazilians, and you hear comments like, "Oh, it's good for a Brazilian game," and that's such an awful
Mhm.
sentence, because it shouldn't be good for a Brazilian game. It should be either good or a bad game. Because if you're not making a game only for Brazilians, that would be an exception. If you're making a game for the whole world, you have to compete with the whole world. You have to aim for the quality, for the quality that international games have. You have to aim for the quality of Canadian studios and American studios and European studios. You cannot aim for a quality standard that's below the international standard, right? And
Yep.
now we're seeing more games that it's we like your kid, like you can't even tell it's a Brazilian game because it looks so good. So just kidding, because and I'm really happy with the scene right now. I feel like we are growing really fast, and I feel like we have something that's really special in the Latin American scene, is that there's a lot of games doing pixel art, and we have a lot of great pixel artists in Brazil, even great pixel artists that are working abroad and are Brazilians. Like
Hmm.
we can talk about Celeste and other games that people know about and have like a
Yeah.
Brazilian crew behind it. So I hope that we get to the point where the development scene in Brazil is more mature, and we have much more big studios here in Brazil, but we still can keep this part of our culture of really loving old school kind of vibe for games and loving pixel art and trying to do something unique.
And I think that's a really good point you said there, Pedro, about kind of that getting out of that stigma of it's a game just for Brazilian consumers, or this is a game just for the African market, or the Chinese market, or European, and so on. And we have seen, like, I think when we looked at kind of like the international scene like 10, 12 years ago, it was very insular. Like I remember like seeing like major sites would have international international games posts, like this is just a article again, all the games you've never heard of, and they've all were very local to their respective regions.
Hmm.
But with kind of like the rise of digital distribution, I think more notably just kind of like the bar being raised all around for indie developers, that
Right.
it really has become a case where if you want to compete, you can't just be thinking about you and your neighbors.
Mhm.
And we certainly have seen, again, like the quality from the independent space. Like you mentioned Celeste a few minutes ago, like Celeste, Disco Elysium, Stardew Valley, all these games that people like it resonate not just with, the developer and who they show it to, but they went on to become worldwide. And I think that's something a lot of developers need to understand, that you're not just competing with your local studios anymore. Like with Steam, I can download a game from a developer in Brazil, I can download one from India, from Africa, and and I guess somewhat natively, you are competing indirectly with everyone. But in the same token, it's allowing these games that truly stand out to really, I think, raise the notoriety of their studio as well as their respective country.
Right, for sure. And if you talk about like digital distribution being a major factor in how people from anywhere in the world can have access to making their game available, right? And that's also true for engines. Like we have Unreal and Unity and Game Maker and Construct has so many engines that make it possible for anyone to start making great games. And we know that great games do not depend on an immense budget or like a colossal amount of workers. You can have a really small game that's great and is very commercially successful. And of course, that depends on other things like marketing and so on. But I agree completely. We have to think about competing in an international market, and your cultural baggage and your region shouldn't dictate who you compete with. It should dictate your style. It should dictate what kind of experience you're trying to serve. It should dictate aspects of the experience of the game. That's where it should be a good influence. But you shouldn't look around to see if your game's the best game in your neighborhood. That's not enough. You have to be on the top 100 games of that week or that month on Steam page. You have to be on the first page of eShop and the PSN. That's what we should aim for. And if we have an international standard that we're fighting to get ahead of, then we should be able to see more and more great games that are trying to be as competent as they can.
Yep. And I think what's like very surprising to me these days is that a lot of my audience is international. Like I've been getting a lot more followers outside the United States, both on YouTube and on my Medium posts. And I think there is that growing idea that if we want to make games, we need to start thinking more than just, the people around us. And this is not just in terms of design, but, in terms of quality, onboarding, UI, UX. And as you said, like earlier, with your background doing the content work and like content analysis, like understanding what somebody else is going to perceive when they look at your game. And like for people listening to us right now, like what I just said, it sounds very simple, but I've seen so many developers struggle with this idea that, somebody can look at my game and go, I have no idea what the heck this game is. What is what is it? And I'm just sitting there going, oh well, I made this, so surely it's perfect. If I understand it, surely everyone is. It's not my fault that my game isn't being understood.
No, yeah, that's a tough blow. Like you have to be really open-minded and able to take criticism, because you only make better decisions and better projects with the people that are telling what's wrong about your decisions, what's wrong about what you're doing. Because when
Mhm.
people recognize you, that feels great. When people look at our game and say, "Yo, that's great pixel art and it's beautiful
Mhm.
game," that feels great for us because it's just validation that we're doing something right. But if there's something that's wrong or not working or not being conveyed in the best way, and nobody says anything, it's going to keep being bad. And when we launch the game, we're going to have a bad element in the game, and it's going to sell like worse than it could have been, right? When we
Yep.
started working on Evertried, we actually took part in a very, very, very small event for developers in Sao Paulo here in Brazil. And we learned a lot about people getting confused with our design. We had plenty of enemies that people took too much time figuring out the pattern. We had visual feedback that wasn't conveying as we expected about the enemy behavior or how many health points it has. And we took that to heart and we tried to change everything to make as approachable as it can for everyone. So if we have something that's not working for the players, it doesn't make sense for us to keep, even though we feel it's a great decision. So a particular example was that we had an enemy in Evertried that it could take 2 hits before being defeated. So we tried to have him have a little armor in his body. And when you attacked him, he lose his armor and then you can kill it. And like a lot of players didn't realize it was an armor. Another players didn't realize it was related to how many hits it could have. And of course, in terms of diegetic game design and art, it was a great decision because I'm trying to communicate resilience based on art that's within the game. It's great, but it wasn't working. So we had to take it out. We changed for a small shield icon above the enemy head, and it turned out it was working better than the previous decision. So you cannot be too proud of your work in a way that impedes you from changing and trying to adapt and listening to what the people are saying. And that's a kind of mindset that it's hard to have, and we have always to remind ourselves that criticism, when constructive, it's a very good thing to have, and we have to be very grateful for people that are taking the time to criticize us.
And that's why playtesting is pretty much worth its weight in gold for any developer. Because, like you said, it can look amazing to you, to everyone on your team, and then you show the consumer, and everyone just goes, "Oh my god, what the heck is this thing? Why is this in this game?" And I know we're like joking about this, but I've seen developers who had that deer in the headlights moment where everyone they showed the game to, they loved it, they put it out for sale on Steam, and it just bombed. And all the times bombs because of some very simple issue that either nobody commented on, just because of friends, or people commented on and the developer just, ignored it. And as we've said, like in today's market, you really don't have, you don't really have mulligans that you can just throw away and say, oh, I'm just going to ignore this and my game will still do well.
No, yeah, especially when we're talking about digital distribution and how big your first week is. You don't have you only have one game launch. Of course, you can relaunch the game, but it doesn't have the same effect on your game launch. And we know, statistically speaking, that if you have a great week launch week, then your game is going to perform well for the rest of its life cycle. And if you bomb on your launch week, then your game is going to perform poorly. So you cannot afford to avoid listening. You cannot afford to make this kind of bad decision because you didn't want to listen. You didn't want to take the time to take criticism. And I understand that some teams and some developers might say that they don't have the time to do this or they don't have the resources. And I would advise that if you don't have the time and resource to do like a small focus group or testing, then you should reevaluate your planning, because it's such a crucial step that it's more important that additional enemy, additional skill, or additional character that you're going to put in the game. Because you can always do DLC, free DLC, maybe more levels, more everything. But if the core concept is not working, then the game's not working. And there's a way to know if the core concept is working. And people are willing to talk about that. So we should listen to players, and we should really do focus groups and gameplay testing and alpha testing. And especially for us that we don't have like a very long track record of development, this is only our second game. There's no better way to learn about game design than players telling you what's wrong about your game. Then we can, and that doesn't mean that their solution is the best solution, but they know perfectly what the problem is. Sometimes they talk about that the game doesn't work because the sword is red for the main character, and that's not the issue. But they telling you about the sword being red tells you a lot about your color coding or maybe your class system. So you have to decode what the player is talking about and really try to figure out how you can make him understand the message that you want to tell him.
Mm-hmm. And for people watching this record right now, you obviously can't see our cameras, but I'm just like nodding my head this whole time because this is all the stuff that I've said many times on videos and interviews. It's great to hear somebody else kind of say these points.
No, it's such an important message, and I mean I'm guilty of it too. I'm sure that we did plenty of mistakes ourselves, and we try to really listen to our own advice. But such a great message to talk about, like paying attention to marketing and paying attention to planning and paying attention to feedback, because these I believe are the 3 pillars that are most important to make any kind of game successful. Because each game has its own game design, its own genre, so you cannot talk about what's the best game design for every game, because every game has its own. But you can talk about how important planning is. You can talk about how game
Hmm.
testing is for every kind of game, right?
Yeah. And I need to be careful because if we go too much on this, we'll be here for like the next hour or two. There's a lot that I can certainly talk about with this point. Um, One thing that I wanted to touch on, as you said regarding like making sure that the core works. Like again, like if your core gameplay loop isn't working or people aren't responding to it, nothing else really matters. And what I want to talk about, what you said, like at the kind of the start of this discussion, with kind of being attracted to Danio's design when you ran
Mhm.
into him at like a local conference, like what aspects of it kind of like resonated with you that you said, you know what, I want to work on this. I want take this
Mhm.
concept and elevate it.
So I believe there are. I always do this. I always talk about there are three things that caught my attention, and I end up talking about two. So forgive me if I if I make a wrong number count. But the first thing is that the game was really iterative. So there's the game was procedural. So you kill the enemies, you go to the next floor, and the number of enemies and the type of enemies, which at that time was just like different colors of slimes, was something that it just gave so much liberty in terms of game design of what we could do, that made me excited to try to figure out how we can make it like such a cool way to introduce progression to strategy, maintaining it in a procedural kind of box, but still giving enough information to players so they can plan ahead their difficulty curve. Was such a novel concept for me to work on, that it made us really excited. And the second thing was, it was a turn-based game in a sense that's like a mystery dungeon kind of vibe, that when you move, everything else moves. So it gave the game a quality of still being very strategy focused and very positioning heavy, but not being slow in any sense. So it was an opportunity for us to do a strategy game for players that really enjoy turn-based combat and turn-based RPGs and turn-based any kind of game, and making a more pick and play kind of experience where players that really enjoy like playing maybe like turn-based RPGs, but are not in the mood for reading long stories and going through the introduction and learning about more complex class systems and attribute systems and stats, could just pick a game that gives him the core of the position and strategy of these kind of games in a more casual, in a sense that you don't have to play for 2 hours to have a meaningful session. You could just pick Evertried, play like 5-10 minutes, have a great time, and just put it away and play again like afterwards. So this and this was supported with which at the time was a combo system. So you were killing slimes and your combo went up, and the combo has implications. So it gave the player also a reason to try to play fast, which at this point, like we reworked that to be the focus system that unlocks modifiers, which are special effects for the main character. Never tried, but at the time, like just the opportunity to work with a game that had turn-based combat that could be really fast, that could be rewarding for players for playing fast, but still be enough of a strategy game that turn-based RPG players could enjoy, was just something that we cannot pass on.
Hmm. And we spoke about the quality of the pixel art earlier from Brazilian studios and Brazilian artists. Who did the art for Evertried?
So Lunic Games does the art for Evertried, and in Lunic Games we have Eduardo Lurius, which is his nickname, and he's my business partner. He's also the co-founder of Lunic Games. He's our lead artist and art director. And we also have another artist at Lunic called Victor, and also did a great work with animations and the pixel art. And they already had like a track record of doing pixel art on the side and doing outsourcing with pixel art and vector art. So it just felt that was the right type of game for us to introduce our pixel art, because it's style based, it's very like geometric, so it's a great fit for this kind of style, we figured.
Hmm. Yeah, I just want to say, like, to the team, like, I really enjoyed the art, and I know a few people who were watching were really enjoying just like how great it looked.
No, yeah, I'm really proud of our artists at Lunic Games. I feel they carry us a lot of the time, because people have been really kind to us, really supportive, and I'm a fan of their work too. So I cannot say anything bad about the art. I really love them, but I know that if they were here, they would spend a lot of time talking about the mistakes that they did and why it's not perfect, why they would like to spend more time on it, because of course they have the heart of an artist. But I really appreciate people enjoying the art of Evertried.
Yeah, and there's definitely a lot that I can touch on when it comes to like Evertried's design. And for those of you again who are listening to us right now or watching this on YouTube, we did play the game for our indie spotlight, so I do have some background in be able to play the game and talk a little more about the design questions of it. So a few things from when I played the game that I just wanted to ask you about, Paige. So the first one is kind of the roguelite of it, or the kind of the growth or progression. Because from the demo, we really didn't see anything changing from run to run. I know
Mhm.
that this is a part of what's going to be in the full version. So could you, for people listening, like elaborate on kind of like what stays or what is persistent or carryover that will help people win?
Sure. So the main thing that can help you in Evertried, besides playing it and making better decisions, are modifiers and skills, which both you can acquire in the shop floors. And skills, every time that you use them, they actually gain something called mastery experience. And after using a skill enough times, the skill can evolve, adding more effects and becoming more powerful and more cost efficient. And this evolution is pervasive among runs. So if you actually evolve a skill during your run, the next time it appears in a shop or next time that you play Evertry, it will already appear evolved at the shop. So if you spend your time in runs casting skills and gaining mastery experience, you're actually basically grinding your skills so they become much more powerful. And eventually it will help you have an easier time with dealing with different enemies because they can become really broken at some points in terms of the power level of them. And the cool thing is that if each skill has 4 different levels, it starts on level 1 and you can upgrade it three more times. And on the 4th level, the skill becomes mastered. And if you master a skill, you can start your game with one skill already equipped. So it pays off for you to really grind the skills and acquire more mastery points in the skill, especially if there's a particular skill that you really like and it really fits your build, because you can then start your run from the beginning with it already equipped.
Hmm. All right. Another thing that I want to ask about, you mentioned earlier about like having like that diegetic interface, a diegetic design. They're trying to keep
Mhm.
everything within universe and things along those lines. I want to ask about the enemy design. Because as you
Mhm.
said earlier, you were influenced by kind of the mystery dungeon games, that kind of a WeGo system that everybody moves at the same time, which in of itself creates interesting questions about how do you design enemies that are going to fit your game, but also have to adhere to that rule. So, could you talk a little bit about kind of like what was the philosophy for how you want the enemies to work in Evertried?
This is such a cool question. I'm so glad you asked about this because it was a really a journey full of learning from from everything that we got from gameplays and people actually giving us criticism. So basically, we know that the game has this kind of system where when you move, everything else moves. So there are already one element that we can play around, which is how many turns a unit has to have before it can move. So we have units that can move every turn and enemies that can move every other turn. This create a kind of asymmetry to the board already, which is kind of interesting to play around. And of course, we knew that the basic enemy should be someone that could hit the player and it could hit it back and it can move every turn. So that's the marking or more basic enemy. But to create more enemies, we had one big combat rule that we had to agree. We have to abide to, which is that every try can be finished with just dashes, movement, and basic attacks. So we have to make sure that the player doesn't need skills or modifiers to clear the game. So every enemy has to give the opportunity for the player to outmaneuver it. So instead of thinking about the power level of the player of the enemy and making enemies like deal 2 damage or have 3 life, you have to think about what kind of position it forces the player to understand. So for instance, there's the Casking, which is like a mage kind of enemy that attacks from afar. It actually casts a skill that targets 2 and 3 tiles from the user. So if you try to keep in a line with it, you probably take damage from its skill. So you can try to move sideways to avoid its line of sight, or you can see that it has a blind spot right next to it. So you can bait his attack and try to use the turn that he spent casting the skill to really close the gap and try to finish it. So this is the kind of philosophy that we went after. And units that can telegraph some kind of attack or can force you to prioritize what kind of position you should have, what kind of enemy you should take first. And there are much more enemies in the full version of the game, and some that makes the player really consider if they should just deal with the enemies around him first, or if he should go for the enemy that's doing something really sneaky in the background. So basically, positioning dictates what kind of the design of the enemies that we try to do.
And as kind of a follow up to that, in Evertried there are boss fights in the game. We didn't get a chance to show them off during when I play this on stream, but how do the boss fights either break the rules or kind of reinforce the rules that you've set for the other enemies?
Right. So for the demo, we have one boss at the end of the demo, but for the full game, we have more bosses, and we actually end up giving a little spoiler in our trailer. But the thing that we went after with the bosses is every 10 floors, you have a different area in the tower. So the first 10 floors are a snowy field, and the next 10 floors are more lava and fiery area, and it keeps going through the 50 floors of the tower. And every area introduces a new type of enemy and new kind of rules that you have to understand about the behavior of this kind of enemies, hazards, and mechanics. And the bosses are basically the trial that you have to really prove you understood part of that mechanic. So I don't want to spoil it too much, but let's say if the on the first area there's a little enemy called Spocking. Every time he moves, he leaves a darkness cloud behind him, and if you step on that darkness cloud, you take damage. So you really have to maneuver around him because he moves in a kind of random way, and you have to use the dash and position to try to corner him or try to figure out a way to kill him without stepping on the darkness cloud. And so the lesson that the player has to learn with that enemy is really using the dash and positioning to corner your enemy. And this is the kind of lesson that we want the player to prove he really understood when facing a boss that would challenge your dash understanding. And there's a boss that could challenge your understanding of baiting different types of attacks, and bosses that really can challenge you in your understanding of how to use hazards in a creative way. This is the kind of design philosophy that we went after, basically teaching the player about the mechanic through enemies and using the boss to really turn that to 11 and really see if the player can master that kind of lesson that he just learned.
Yeah, and again, like I'm sure when we get to play the full version of this, I'll be struggling with a lot of those bosses when we get to them.
I really hope so.
Now, one comment or one bit of criticism that we were talking about on the live show and during the stream was we really didn't see a lot of like variance between buttons. Like with a game like this, because as you said a few minutes ago, that the balance is designed around, can the player get through without any need of skills, without using any of the persistent elements? It started to feel like if somebody beats a game, like I wasn't sure there was going to be reasons for them to come back to it. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. And for the full game, like, are there any systems or elements that you're planning to kind of add more replayability to?
Yes, through our Kickstarter, there were a couple of stretch goals that we actually end up achieving through our amazing backer support. And the game has additional game modes too. So we already have like a hard mode and an endless mode, which is kind of survival. And the endless mode bends the rules of the game a little bit. So it bends what kind of enemies can appear. It bends how you can acquire skills. It bends more of the rules of the world. And there's a narrative reason for that, which is really cool. And because we do have multiple endings, so depending on the choices that the player does along their run, you have a different outcome for the game, and based on that different outcome, more options appear for the player. So besides working around skills and try to master them and trying to figure out the best build to finish the game. And finishing the game is no small task. The game gets pretty hard already. There's also additional game modes that are really cool to investigate and try out. And especially once you beat the game and you go through the hard mode, I feel like the hard mode is the true mode of Evertried, where everybody should really challenge themselves to try to beat the game. And sorry, I'm talking about my game, and I'm so excited because I'm really looking forward for more people to play Evertried. And every time someone plays Evertried, I get so excited to see them play because I can see them learning the mechanics as they play and becoming better at the game as they play. But yeah, basically, I would say that besides mastering all the skills, there are different endings for the game, so people should try out different strategies to get to the end of the game. And there are also two other game modes, which are the hard mode and the endless mode.
Sounds good. And I know we are like right over our time. There's still so much we can all about, and I definitely want to have like more discussion about kind of like growing your suit into the internationals.
Mm-hmm.
I guess from a design standpoint or an art standpoint, or anything about Evertried, anything that we didn't touch on that you like to bring up.
There's a really cool challenge in the design sense for Evertried, which is balancing wise. How we had to make a game that was, we cannot use damage as a balancing tool, because when we talk about RPGs and action games, you can make a skill more powerful by making it deal more damage. You can make an enemy more powerful by making it deal more damage. But in Evertried, you only have 3 hits before you die. So we didn't have that kind of resource to play around with variety and power level. So it was a really interesting way for us to really think outside of the box of how to make an enemy. Sorry, there's a mosquito here. How to make an enemy hard to deal with without making it just deal more damage. How can we make a game more challenging and harder without making it just more unforgiving, but actually more complex in a way that if the player cracks that code, it's both rewarding for him because he understands why he's playing better, but it's also not unfair if he dies. That was a really interesting balancing challenge that we have, and we hope we nail that in Evertried, because we hope that when someone dies in Evertried, he figures out why he died and what he could have done different, and the next run he tries to do something different. So that's the one of the most exciting things. And the other thing that we didn't touch about, and it's not present in the demo, but it's actually in the full game, is the whole reason of why is the warrior in the tower? Why was the tower created? Who created the tower? What's happening with the souls? There's so much about narrative in the game, and we try to do that in a very optional way. So you don't have to invest too much time in the story. You don't have to interact with NPCs. You don't have to really read a lot of text if you don't want to, because we want to retain a pick up and play quality for Evertried. But I really look for people investigating the story, try to figure out exactly what happened and why is there a warrior in basically purgatory with no memory of what happened, why it just ascended to the afterlife. There's a little bit of mystery behind it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what you said there is like very interesting about having this like low number restriction to the design. Because as you said, like for developers listening, like when you deal with games like this, when you can't just say, "Oh, we make this enemy hard because he hits you 5 times harder," or he has 6 times more health, it creates those very interesting constraints around how to keep things interesting without just trying to scale things up. And you said earlier about how the skills themselves don't necessarily, give you more power. Like you don't have someone in the game, I'm sure, that's going to give your character like double the health or triple the health. And it is a very interesting challenge point. I think it leads to like that kind of discussion about like tabletop games and how you can get those very interesting design elements when you don't have to worry about scaling things to, have 10 million health points or 3,000 attack.
Right, such an unique challenge, and it was really fun to tackle. But it made us realize that we were kind of spoiled in a sense of how our brain perceives game design, because it's such a comfortable way to do things like, oh, there's the blue slime, you just deal 1 damage, and the green slime is more powerful because it deals twice that damage. Such an easy decision, but not necessarily the most engaging way to approach the game. And for Evertried, it was a good thing that we didn't even have that option, because we couldn't have an enemy that deals 2 damage at the start, because then what's the player learning? It has 3 health, but it can take 2 hits, and it's not particularly engaging. The thing for us was really to figure out what's the biggest resource for the player in terms of the decisions that are made that the player is making. It's not actually his health or his charges, which functions as the mana for the game. It's actually the positioning he's giving up versus the positioning he wants to be in to clear the board. So playing defensively versus playing offensively, and you have to do kind of both at different times. So more easier enemies are enemies that you can just approach them and slay them, and you can just like go picking them up like one by one. It's such a good feeling just to slay them without thinking too much. But more complex enemies, you have to think about how can you put that enemy in a position where you can approach it without taking damage or without being in the line of danger from other enemy. How can you use hazards to help you take down enemies that have 2 health, because you cannot sometimes you cannot do 2 attacks against an enemy because he will retaliate. So how can we make sure that the enemies are challenging you in terms of positioning, like playing a chess match against a good player? Sometimes you want to be in the offense, but the other player is challenging the position of the board, so you have to regroup and rethink and try a different approach on how to trap the enemy and how to create an ambush to really take the rook or take the queen from your opponent.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up chess, because when you watch the VOD I sent you, me playing the game, I got into like the perfect checkmate position where I was completely surrounded on all sides.
That happens too. And when that happened, at least for me, I have that feeling of backtracking my moves. Like, when did that happen? How did I end up here? So, and hopefully there's enough room for people to retrace that and think, yeah, I should go to the right instead of the left, and maybe I would be all right. And the other thing is, I don't know if subconsciously, but most people, when they start to play Evertride and they get into a tricky situation, they go to the corner, which is like a death sentence. If you go to the corner, you're limiting your movement options, and it's just so cozy and so safe in the corner, and then you get cornered by the enemies. It's like, I don't have anywhere to run to.
Yeah. One last design question, because we didn't touch on this too much. I just won't bring this up, and then we'll wrap things up for tonight. The focus meter, or the combo meter, as you said, it went through some iteration. For people listening to us, the idea, of course, is that every time you kill an enemy, you build up meter. As you're not fighting, it starts to drop down. And so the general idea is you want to keep your combo high so you get more resources, so you can then get more stuff at the shops. Did that go through any other iterations or changed or element?
Yes, at first it was more of a combo counter than a focus system. So it was very much related to how many units you kill in a sequence, and it was basically just a multiplier to your shards, so your income in the game. And the tricky part for us is there was a moment in design that we had to choose if the game was going to be a roguelike first and then a strategy game, or if it's going to be a strategy game first and then a roguelike. Because if we went through it's a roguelike first and then a strategy game, then we would be okay with players taking damage from things that they didn't understand at first, because we understood that dying is part of the strategy and you have to play a lot of times. And if we went through with the strategy approach, we knew that we should give players enough information beforehand, because every mistakes that they make should be well informed before them. So it's okay for them if they make mistakes, but it wouldn't be okay if they feel it wasn't fair. And that we decided to go with the strategy first approach, and that meant that we couldn't make the game force you to keep your focus. So it was always an interesting mechanic for us to make basically a reward for the players that can play the game faster, but it shouldn't be something that players have to do or players have to play fast, because we want to make a game that would be approachable for players that want to play slower. And what that meant is that we should give a reward for players that use them, and that ended up being not only the bonus shards that you get for maintaining your focus, but making it trigger fire effects. So that was the exit that we went with. So when we were designing the modifier effects, which are passive effects that you can purchase at shops, we decided to make modifiers that are always active. So even if you're focused at the ground level, when you pick that up, the effect is already working. You can take advantage of that. but we also could make more powerful modifiers that had to have your focus level in a higher state, and if it dropped, it stopped working. So for instance, there's Rip, which is a modifier where you kill an enemy, you gain a charge back by killing the enemy. So it makes more the use of skill more efficient because you're getting more resources for defeating enemies. But if your focus level is below 5, it doesn't do nothing, right? Sorry, it doesn't do anything. So it made possible for us to allow like snowbally kind of builds and effects and strategies for players that really want to be very aggressive and keep their focus high and play fast and have very strong effects. But if they make a mistake, there's also a very risky strategy to have, because then everything's going to shut down if your focus level drop. And at the same time, we had enough resources for players that want to play slower to pick up modifiers that can trigger right from the start. So basically, what the rework that we had was making sure that the focus system is something that players don't need to pay attention at first, but it just clicks for more experienced players. Like the payoff for paying attention to the focus gauge is something that's become more and more appealing the more you play the game and the more you master the game.
So I think with that, we kind of went over our time, and there's still, I think, a lot more we can discuss. But let's begin to wrap things up here. So, for people listening to us right now, when is Evertried like scheduled to come out?
So we have a launch plan for fall 2021. So we don't have a clear date yet, but basically we're looking between September and November. So we have like a 3 month window there to make sure Evertride hits all platforms at the same time. So we're looking for Switch, PlayStation 4 and 5, Xbox Series X, and PC with Steam and GOG. And yeah, so all platforms at the same time.
All right, great. And are you playing on any consoles for Evertried as well?
So yeah, we're planning for to launch on Switch and PlayStation and Xbox alongside with the Steam and GOG version.
And do you have any social media you would like to mention, like for people to find a Lunic or Evertried or whatever?
Yeah, for sure. Lunic Games has its own website. It's called lunicgames.com. There's a contact, also email there. So if you want to reach out and just complain about how hard Evertride is, I don't know. So yeah, for sure, please reach out to us. There's also Evertride Twitter at Evertride Game. We also post like the rankings for our demo speed runs. So if you want to play the demo and you end up finishing the demo, please send us a screenshot of your clear time on Twitter at Evertride Game, and we'll be sure to shout out your time and put your time in our rankings. And there's also Lunic Games Twitter at Lunic Games. So be sure to follow us there too. And hopefully we're going to continue making games and hopefully continue to try to listen to what you guys think and try to make the best game that we possibly can.
All right, so I guess my final question then is: do you have anything you'd like to say to the fans, your Kickstarter backers, anyone? Uh, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And guys, everybody that's listening to this, and really thank you for making this happen, because it's already a hard thing to do your first PC title. We're doing our best with the resources that we had, but you can be sure that we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for your support on social media, if it wasn't for the backers in our Kickstarter. You made this happen. And even though we just announced that we got a publisher with Dungeon Entertainment, it was only this that only happened because of the Kickstarter success. That only happened because of the support of everybody that play our game in alpha, play our game in beta, and talk about how bad some decisions that we made were. And we really try to listen to you guys, and we couldn't be more thankful to all the support that you guys gave us. So thank you very much, and I really, 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 really hope that you guys are proud of Evertride when it officially launches by the end of the year. And I really hope you guys have fun with Evertride.
All right. I think that is a great point to end things on for this week's cast. Pedro, it's been a pleasure hanging out with you tonight. As I said earlier, we played the game, we looked at the store page, so there should be links to those videos in the description for people watching. And really enjoy it, and best of luck with the release.
Thank you, Josh. It was great. I had a great time. Thanks again for having me. And I hope I didn't talk too much and didn't come across too talky, but I just love to talk about games. So thank you again for giving us that opportunity.
Oh, I certainly know the sentiment there. So, with that said, everyone, we're going to wrap up this cast here. Be sure to check out Evertried, and Lunic Games. I'll be linking all that in the down below. As always, if you are a developer working on an upcoming game or want to talk game design, we're always looking for guests for future casts, whether they are live or recorded. Come back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. And until next time, take care.